Go ahead.
Ani. Bonjour, kwe. Welcome, everyone, to the territorial of Anishinaabe Algonquin Territory. I'd like to invite you to the IDEA Connector Studio here in Ottawa. I'm Anishinaabe Kwe from Manitoulin Island, Donjaba, Wolf Clan Mother. I'd like to welcome our online panelists and you, the audience, from across Canada. We also like to invite you, the audience, to use the chat function on the top right-hand corner of the screen and to submit their thoughts and their questions, and they're being discussed by the panelists, and to also submit your own questions. Later during the dialogue, we will take some time and ask our panelists to share their thoughts, their questions, and suggestions and comments on our topics that you're all most welcome to join us. I will introduce you to online panelists. From Edmonton, Alberta, we have Karen McKenzie, who is a proud Cree Métis woman and the co-founder and president of Macintosh Canada, an Indigenous-owned international consulting company. Business ownership, along with academic and senior management positions, has led Karen to this important crossroad in our collective societies, where co-creation of the future is both important and enabling. We have, from Ashquegan, Ontario, is Tuesday Johnson McDonald. She founded and owns Tap Resources Associates, a business delivering diverse conferences that showcase the Indigenous cultures. Her company was recently awarded with 2 awards, the Best Conference in 2017. First, the Canadian Events Society's Best Conference 2017 in Canada, and secondly, the World Indigenous Peoples Conference on Education. TAP is the first Indigenous event management firm to win this national title. Next, we have, from Ottawa, Ontario, Jennifer David, who is a member of the Chapleau Cree First Nation, a skilled, experienced communicator, project manager, planner, facilitator, and is committed to portraying an accurate and positive narrative of Indigenous peoples in Canada. And Jennifer is a partner of Envision Insight Group here in Ottawa. We also have, from Listigouche, Quebec, is Victoria Labildois, a Mi'kmaq entrepreneur. Victoria owns Rapajek Excavation, owns rental properties, co-owns Wejusek Construction, and is an active partner in our joint ventures. Victoria served the Indigenous Public Service, working at the band, regional, and national levels. And from Kingston, in Ontario, we have David Harris, who is our Foresight Method expert. David is a fellow of the World Academy of Arts and Science. He is the president of the Proteus Canada Institute, past chair of the Canadian Pugwash, and a foresight specialist. He specializes in the use of foresight methods to promote an improvement in human security, which includes food, education, health, and well-being. And your moderator, myself, Denise Ann Machuita Busno, is a legal Indigenous policy consultant, having extensive experiences in the public and nonprofit sector, consulting senior management, and recommends both law and policy and culturally based solutions. And I am from Garden River First Nation, adjacent to Sault Ste. Marie in Ontario, and an Ottawa citizen, as well as I mentioned earlier, Wolf Clan Mother from Manitoulin Island, and a Nokomis of 2. So now, in the next hour and a half, the panelists and the online participants, as yourself, will explore the overarching question: What if a collaborative entrepreneur ecosystem was created to develop, build capacity, and provide better support to aspiring Indigenous women, entrepreneurs, and small business owners? Since nothing happens in isolation, we will explore, quote unquote, the big question and series of sub-questions. Today's panel is a part of a broader exercise of dialogue and broad consultations, which we will hope to serve as a framework to help Idea Connector and the Proteus Canada Institute to implement its proposed National Indigenous Women Entrepreneur Ecosystem. I will now ask David Harris to explain this dialogue and a broad consultation process. Now, everyone, panelists and audience, let's turn to David.
I'm really happy to be with you all today. This is a real pleasure. I'm looking forward to learning from you and learning things that will help me be better able to think ahead. In the past year, we've been involved in a number of discussions with people, particularly in Western Canada and Central Canada, about the whole issue of Indigenous entrepreneurship. We've carried out a lot of reading, studies and reports on the subject and then the issues connected to it. And as I'm sure you know, we have a panel survey underway now on the air, which I hope you will all participate in and send in comments to. By the end of May, we hope to have a report on this process. Now, the process is the study and the research we've done to the present, the panel or the poll that I just mentioned, this panel today, and the panel next week. Now, I ask in one sense that you don't be disappointed if you don't get all your points out today, because you'll have a week before the next panel, and we'd love to hear from you, and then we'll have the time in next week's panel. The process, it would be too sort of overwhelming to try to handle entrepreneurship through just one question. And that's the reason we here at Idea Connector came up with the 8 questions that we'll look at today. There's nothing in those questions that's meant to limit what you wish to contribute, your feelings, your beliefs, whatever. They are only to encourage discussion and maybe to provoke some debate. We only have about 10, 12 minutes for each of the questions. So again, remind us all that we have the week coming, the poll underway, and next week's panel. At the end of each of the question sessions, what I will try to do is share some views on what I understand were the main points. I do this in the context of raising further questions that we may want to consider either later today or in the future. Again, this is absolutely open discussion. Please, if you have other subjects or questions you wish to raise as we go through the process, let us know. Denise Ann.
Miigwech. We often hear about many challenges facing Indigenous women looking to become entrepreneurs or that to own their own small business. We often hear about the need for funding and for mentorship. However, from experience, as we know, there are many other issues. On your screen, you can see a series of challenges identified through the various discussions. I just lost my spot. And scanning studying reports. Panelists, you now have 10 minutes for a dialogue on the following question. Which challenges most resonate with you and why?
Who would like to take the lead?
No one.
I'll jump in. There are so many challenges, but I prefer to look at it as where are the opportunities? If we focus on the challenges, we'll get stuck. There are so many opportunities around us, and I think that the notion of the ecosystem is that holistic approach, and to start looking at what would contribute to a better life for me, my family, my community, and so on. And so where do those opportunities exist?
So I would agree with what Karen said. It's good to sort of see things as opportunities, but when I do think of challenges, I think of, what are the things that held me back before or as I was starting my own business. So I have to go way back here because I first started my company about 18 years ago. But what I recall, the thing that was challenging to me was to just understand business planning. I mean, if you wanted any kind of funding, you had to either have a business plan or at least sort of understand the parts of a business plan. And I had no idea. I had an idea and I thought, oh, this will make a good business, but that's not enough. And so that was a barrier at the beginning, is just understanding how to put together a business plan and what's in a business plan. And even if you don't have it sort of originally on paper, thinking through the pieces of a business plan really gets you to think whether your idea is actually something that could turn into a viable business. Because I had to do a market analysis. So all these terms that I didn't know anything about, but really market analysis was, why should you get into doing business in what you want to do? Why is it different than what's already out there? And what are you going to offer that's not already being offered? I mean, it's pretty basic. And it really made me have to think a lot about what I wanted to do in my business. But it was sort of I was a bit intimidated by these terms and all these things that are in a business plan. So to me, that was a challenge early on.
I took a look at the shopping list of challenges that were presented, and certainly we hear these over and over again. As Karen, you don't want to get stuck there. But when I was trying to think which one I think would be the biggest challenge, I identified two, one from the list and one on my own. From the list, certainly for me, working in construction, I needed money. I needed financing, I needed access to capital. So that was a barrier for me, but I challenged it, went around it, over it, under it, whatever I had to do, I got through it. But another barrier I found, and going back to, I've started a number of companies, one of my challenges was myself. And getting over the fear or lack of confidence, I could do all the research and have all the business lingo and terminology. I went out and got an MBA to give myself confidence and push forward from that angle. But I think that's one of the challenges that we need to address if we're going to help our women rise up.
I think for me, I agree with Victoria. When I looked at the challenges, there were some certainly that resonated with me. I remember at the very beginning when I started the business, I had this little saying that I would say as a marketing, branding, sales, oh my, because I had no idea about that. I come from not-profit organizations. You don't have to sell anything. It's like the mandate was the mandate. So that was a challenge to really overcome. And as well as the personal growth, I found that, certainly the business plan, reaching out to finding someone to reach out to an organization that understood who I was, what my background and the reality of what I was bringing to the table kind of thing in my culture. It was hard to find a group that perfectly fit. So I went for as far as personal growth is concerned, I went the traditional way to help build up my own self-esteem and my own self-worth. And I had to tell you, that was at a point in the business where I was really scared that it was going to be a failure and having to go back into the working for somebody else, which I didn't want to do. But, you know, after paying attention to myself and doing what I needed to do on that level, my business has surpassed my expectation. I'm achieving dreams and coming up with new dreams because I've been able to reach those benchmarks, I guess. So there's a lot to say to looking at yourself and helping yourself.
And if I could continue on that theme, you know, when you start out as a consultant, it's what value do you place on what you do for others? And so I could look in the mirror and say, I'm confident, I have all these skills. But then when someone says, well, what are you going to charge? You have to take a big look at how do you value yourself and the services that you're going to be delivering. So for me, I'm thinking I'm self-confident, but when I have to ask that question or answer that question, you know, I'm challenged, or I was challenged at that time.
Okay, David, do you want to, after listening to our panelists, and to be able to summarize on this challenge for them and why?
We have on our little notes here the word summarize, and I don't like that word very much because it sort of implies imposition. So I have 3 takeaways from what you've all said. One is that words matter. I mean, Karen started out with whether it's challenges or opportunities. And depending on, certainly from my experience in a number of countries, those 2 words can mean anything from exactly the same thing to very, very different things. So that's my first takeaway. The second is the challenges are both external, the context in which you find yourself, your friends, your colleagues, the people that wish to support you, your family, your community, but they are also oneself. One of the great lessons from a major project in the United States on intelligence coordination was that the major weakness in the United States of America was that the people in intelligence didn't know themselves. And they didn't make any effort to know themselves. And they had an opportunity, so back to Karen's word, to learn about themselves that would make them, put them in a better position to succeed, to do well. So those are my 3 takeaways. Words matter. Context that we have some control over, but not a lot. And the opportunity of oneself.
Miigwech. Panelists, we now have 10 minutes to discuss question number 2. Which challenges would you title differently and or deserve more detailed expressions?
Well, I think when I was looking at the list, I didn't see personal or professional development, self-development on any of on those lists. At least it didn't, you know, out at me.
Okay. Yes, Jennifer, I was going to say the exact same thing. There's nothing really here about, you know, that those sort of work-life balance. Those of you who've ever had a business out of your own home will know that it's really hard to make that separation, and it's hard to sort of care for yourself when, you know, you don't have regular hours, you don't have an office, you don't have a boss. I think that's something important that you need to think through. Again, the word challenge, as we've said, maybe is not the right word, but it is something that really every entrepreneur and Indigenous women entrepreneurs face is finding that sort of work-life balance and sort of seeing your work as part of that, what you said earlier Tuesday, that holistic way of sort of seeing your work and your life. It's all organic. It's again not this sort of separation that we see. You know, you get up and you go to work and you're somewhere for 9 to 5 and then you come home. It's very different when you're an entrepreneur.
I looked trying
I
to.
can't hear you, Victoria. I don't know if everyone else can hear her, but I can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
You're vaguely.
I'm at max
I can hear you.
volume.
Oh, really? So it must be just me. That's fine.
When I read the list again, I was trying to define in my mind what would be a cultural barrier. And so I'm thinking in the context that I'm working in, not the Mi'kmaq culture that exists in my community, but what other culture exists. And I started thinking about the mentality of scarcity that is prevalent here and that could hold people back and that could be seen as a barrier. And by that, I mean uh, the, the mentality where there's not enough, that leads to people competing, to lateral violence and tearing each other down, and just what one of my friends likes to call stinky thinking, negative thinking. So I threw that into the mix of barrier field. But again, I'll put the question out, what was meant by a cultural barrier?
And I think for that, when they see you through the lens as an Indigenous woman or an Indigenous business person, depending on who's on the other side, will have their own, I'll say, their values attached to it. So, for instance, and I don't want to keep going back to kind of revenue streams, but there might be some assumptions about the level, the quality of what you can deliver. And so I think when I look at it through a cultural lens, it's always about taking time to build those relationships before you start jumping into some of those how questions, like how much, how long, how will you do this, and so on, to say, you know, do we have trust and respect here? Do we understand each other? Um, can we pick up the phone to clarify things? So it's building that relationship I found to be a good foundation, and that foundation or that relation those relationships again extend to family and friends and communities and so on. So it's a challenge. It's building that social your social capital, social network. In a way that's going to, um, I'm going to say, uh, make the path forward easier. It allows you to ask for help if you need it. We talk about the need for mentors. Um, and, early mentors in my life came from people that I'm going to say, in some ways, they weren't mentors in a very positive way because they started to speak a language that I didn't quite understand. It was very, I'm going to say, I'll say aggressive, and then you kind of cut out opportunities to grow, and then other people who asked me questions about myself, and then could help build on those strengths. Simple questions like, what is it you're looking? What is it you're really looking for? Is it to get a contract? Is it to grow your business? And I found those questions very useful. So again, when there's trust and respect, it allows, I'll say, both personal growth and also business growth. And maybe I'll jump back in with a on a personal note on a family. From a family perspective, it's to let your family know what's happening and to invite them on the journey with you, because I remembered I had a younger teenage son who was panic stricken because I was leaving uh, a position of employment, to strike out on my own. And his vision was really we were going to be living on the street. There would be no food in the cupboard, and on. And I was quite taken aback. But it really was that lesson to say the people who you need to support you also need to know where you're going, and they can help you.
I'm just going to add it. Like I agree with what's being said, and the networking and the mentoring is a really key aspect. I know when I started, my network into business was next to nil. Because I was coming from a different work environment, working for the band and working in social issue, but becoming an entrepreneur, I knew nothing about business. But I had mentors throughout my life who supported me and helped me develop, kind of thing. In trying to find that network of entrepreneurs who had another perspective around business was a challenge. I ended up joining special events and meeting associations. I actually became board members and a president of a entrepreneurial event management association. And just building that network alone, although it wasn't in my specific field of Indigenous event planning, it was within the meeting industry, and it made a world of difference. And I'm finding like the opportunity that what you're talking about around a women's entrepreneurial ecosystem, something that I've actually started to look for now in joining a very specific Indigenous entrepreneurial association, whether it's women or whatever. But that's what, for me, in my particular position of development. So I'm ready.
Is there other comments that we want to end here before we move on? Okay, thank you, panelists. We're going to go to our next question. Or before we go to the next question, we need to hear the takeaways from David.
No, we don't need to, but I really, really powerfully heard the business about relationships. One thing that I've learned in my long and speckled life is how every single individual has a different set, a unique set of biases, assumptions, and interests. And one of the important things about a relationship is that I am willing to accept yours and you are willing to accept mine so that we can talk together. If our differences and our biases and our assumptions and our interests are such that we can't get along, that we can't answer each other questions, and questions are key to a relationship. Karen, your teenage son saying, where's the food coming from? If you didn't have that sort of relationship, I'm sure he would have been embarrassed to ask such a question. But it's important that we accept. It doesn't matter whether you're Indigenous or non-Indigenous or whatever. Each of us has different, unique set of biases, assumptions, and interests. And it's important for our relationships back to knowing ourselves.
Miigwech, David. Okay, panelists, we're traveling on here to question number 3. Are there other more important, influential challenges that you consider? So we're just building this conversation as we go down the journey together. On the professional development, on the work-life balance.
Well, I think that whole holistic approach,
Yes.
I mean, business plans are a critical piece of it because it helps, structure your thinking. But I look at what's available for Indigenous women to start businesses, and there are, I'll say, programs that assume a certain level of education, perhaps, of knowledge, and doesn't really address the full spectrum of where our women are at. And so I like this approach where the model starts to look at, I'll say, the strengths of our women, and then help lead them into the piece where they need to develop. I remember, sitting in a course and everyone got a disc with spreadsheets on it, and that's hardly the way to start, in my view, of teaching about business planning, because this whole list of items on the list and so on is really provides a huge barrier, and it reflects back on the old, I'll say, the old form of education, the old tell, instruct, and if you're lucky, you'll pick up on it. So, and I come from, I'll say, an academic business background, so I know the language, but, I know it's not being communicated in the best way possible. The spirit of intent is there, but the actual um, outcome is very limited. Again, unless those relationships are there when people can then ask questions to say, I don't know, help me get started.
Karen, when you mentioned this, the spreadsheets, it reminds me that sort of one of the challenges that especially when you're starting out in a business, is you really feel like you need to sort of have an in-depth understanding about everything about business. And I am not a numbers person. So looking at spreadsheets and budgets or cash flows or even like invoicing, like, it would make me nervous because I didn't really know much about it. But I felt like if I don't know this, then I shouldn't have a business. So I feel like sometimes we set up barriers for ourselves because we feel like we need to have more expertise than we really need. So I'm not a financial person. I'm not an accountant. I'm not a bookkeeper. But I have friends who were, and so they helped me. And so, I was in communications. I was as far away as possible from numbers. But you need numbers, to run your business. But it doesn't mean you need to be the person, to be the expert at the numbers. And so I feel like sometimes it's a challenge for women, and it goes back to what you were saying earlier about the sort of self-confidence, that somehow we feel like if we don't have the full package of sort of knowledge and education and sort of self-awareness, that we just feel like, no, having a business is not for me. Whereas I think there's a lot of Indigenous women who would make fabulous business owners and entrepreneurs, but maybe if they feel that they just don't have some of the skills. But there's ways to get those skills, and there's people that you can call on to help you use their skills. Because for somebody, accounting and bookkeeping is their passion. So that's great. Let's bring on people who have a passion in areas that we don't.
I think an area that has to be addressed is looking at, so that example the classroom with readiness, that's not the starting point. The starting point, I think, for our women is addressing the readiness and defining what is entrepreneurship. So it's not a non-Indigenous male carrying a briefcase in a three-piece suit. That's not an entrepreneur. Entrepreneurs come in many shapes and sizes and do different things. I teach a lot of financial literacy in the community, and I start by talking about where our people have come from, and that we've always been entrepreneurs. It's not a new concept that our people have had established trade routes amongst different nations, and we traded and bartered for different things. We were savers, moving to harvest, and so entrepreneurship is not a new concept. And talking to women and doing this, but it is. Because a lot of our women have little side or micro businesses, but don't see themselves as entrepreneurs. So going back to that self-confidence, self-esteem, readiness, and easing into what is the language around this before jumping into something. Okay, we're going to learn this week how to prepare a business plan and talk about spreadsheets. I think that's jumping in, there needs to be a piece in front of that that reminds our people where they've come from and speaks to the resilience and how we got here.
I think I wanted to add in there too, as far as when we talk about important, is looking at our growth path, our developmental path. Certainly, the things that I was looking for as an entrepreneur at the beginning of my journey was different than when I was mid path and it's different to where I am now. It's like Jennifer was sharing some of the stuff around budget. Mine now is financial literacy, investment. You know, I don't have that type of background, but I'm in that position now to say, okay, if I'm going to grow bigger and I'm going to grow differently, I need to have this deeper understanding. So I think that kind of growth path is really important. But what goes along with that is having, I think, the network that helps you with advocacy, helping you, because I find I'm having to educate people around the importance of not only small business, but Indigenous women in business, and why, and around reclamation, why it's important to look at Indigenous women and Indigenous women in business. And it's, you know, I'm not a scholar. I'm not a scholar. I could use some help with white papers that discusses those kind of issues, and that I can then take and help educate the people that I need to educate.
Mm-hmm. I think that's really important, because the mainstream lens is really always about scarcity and, you know, overcoming deficits, overcoming barriers. And, you know, I've had this conversation with our women across the country, and in none of our languages is there a word for poverty. And so it's about creating abundance. So, you know, we're not talking about financial wealth, though that will be part of the equation, but it's really about how do we create a better future, and it includes all these different pieces. And again, it comes back to relationships with the best darn bookkeeper you can find, relationships with you know, legal support, and so on. So it's kind of building on our own inherent strengths and recognizing those as strengths. And, you know, where I live in Treaty 6 in Edmonton, I can walk, you know, I'm going to say less than a kilometer down to the river. And that was our natural Pehonan, a trading place where people came from all over and conducted business for thousands of years. So again, I think it's, you know, I'm talking about that big holistic model, building that sense of self-worth, of pride, that this is part of who we are, that whole transactional piece. And we'll figure it out. And I think what Indigenous people possess is that innate passion and dream to start moving forward. I look at universities and colleges across this country, and they all teach entrepreneurship. How many graduates actually go out and start a business? So you can have all the knowledge you want and know how to put business plans and spreadsheets together, but how do you have that dream to take it forward? And that's what I want to build on.
As a spin-off of Tuesday's comments, I'm thinking about what you said and how we move forward every day, educating and sensitizing the world around us that, yes, there are Indigenous entrepreneurs, and we're going about doing our thing. And it seems that some people need more education than others. So when you encounter, for instance, blatant racism, I find myself getting to a saturation point, and I think, do I have to correct and educate everyone out there? Is that my role? I'm trying to run a business. I'm keeping my eye on the bottom line. You know, I'm doing my best moving forward. But at some point, do I need to fight every battle that's out there? I could give you a concrete example, but I don't want to eat up all the time. And I'm just thinking, we do educate and we do sensitize every day just by our presence out in the landscape. But there's so much education that needs to happen that it can't be my entire focus going forward.
Hello, Jennifer, would you like to add?
No, I think that's good.
Okay, thank you, wonderful panelists. I'm sharing this moment with you in my humor of sovereignty and passion. And so now I'd like to turn it over to David, that he'll have this great takeaway of how passionate we are in what we're doing moving forward.
No, you are. I'm not an academic, although I've been to school more years than I want to admit. My one time in academia was leading a master's program for senior adults, military, civilian, and foreign. And it was a war. It was a war because it was multidisciplinary and multi-department. And the people from the different departments didn't want to work together to teach that one course. So often they wouldn't even show up. I am impressed with the head of the biggest French internet firm who has stood up a university in Paris where there are no professors. I have a line in my foresight world. There are no experts on the future. But future will come, and we all have to do as much as we can to do well to prepare for it. And this is about what you've talked about, the growth path. And you move along that path. Some of the factors you control, some of the factors you do not control. And along the path, you meet more and different people. And this university in Paris, such exams as there are, such accreditation as there is all done by the students. And guess what? There has not been a single graduate in the 2 years the university has existed that has not been hired on graduation. Because it has been about relationships and learning together and learning about oneself together. So the business that you've mentioned about the passion for moving ahead is the way probably the most undeveloped sector in our world, Canada's world, is the education sector. It's still bricks and mortars, somebody standing at the front of the room with a stick on a microphone or something. Every 3 months or 4 months, a piece of paper is put in front of the person that's supposed to be learning, and they have to take an exam. Why that exam? Things have changed. So I hear your point. Back to relationships, knowing yourself, and the fact that education or learning is sort of the academic side. You're all examples. You don't have to be a brilliant academic to be a brilliant success. 2, vocational learning, and something you all bring to the table, experiential learning. And I don't know yet of any university in Canada that has a degree in experiential learning. If there is, please let me know.
I have a comment, and it refers back to Victoria's comment about that, learning and teaching and all the opportunities that come up for us to educate, the wider world about how Indigenous business, how Indigenous women, how we rock. And it can be it's diversionary in some way. You need to teach. You have to assist others in their learning and broadening their perspective, but sometimes it takes you away from the outcome you wanted at the moment.
Miigwech, that being in the moment and how we forge ahead. We're going in and out, just like in our canoes or building our teepees together.
Yeah.
So panelists, we're going to move ahead on question number 4. Challenges exist that should be addressed in ways and means for Indigenous women to identify and develop business relationships, partnerships with established mainstream corporations. As we move along our canoe.
I'm going
I'll have to leave
throw it
this
out
one
to Victoria because she has a partnership with Hydro-Quebec and some of the ways that evolved, or not a partnership, but a relationship. So
I like that interchange. We're moving relationship partnership as we're doing this together, learning together.
So I just took a look again at the question because it's a long question, and it goes back to partnerships. It goes back to building those relationships. So how do you build relationships? First, you get to know each other. How do you get to know each other? You need to meet each other. So looking at the basic premise that people fear what they don't understand. People don't know the community or could have lived in proximity to our community and never stepped on the reserve or on this village ever in their life. And I see it quite often. So how do we go beyond that? So it's starting with an introduction of, and it has to be very non-threatening because I call myself the queen of cold calls. I could cold call all day and try and reach out to people and start sharing ideas, introduce myself, introduce my business. And what I encounter a lot of the time is that people don't even bother to return my call or my email. So then I have to go and jump in my car and go visit them. If I have to drive 3-4 hours to knock on their door. And then I get this Jack Deere look, like the deer in the headlights. Like, so I go about building relationships that way, and I've been at it for a number of years to do that. Karen, you used the example of Hydro-Quebec. So for my excavation company, I wrote my own business plan in January 2011. And in doing the research and looking at what are the opportunities across the territory, I identified Hydro-Quebec as a potential client. So put them in my crosshairs, if you will, that I need to get to know Hydro-Quebec. It's a major operation. I need to find somebody to make contact with and to start fostering that relationship that, A, there are construction companies located in First Nation communities in SBZ, and this is our capacity, and this is our trained labor force, and doing all that. It took me 6 years to do that. So there's capacity added to that relationship building, but it paid off in a very nice contract where Hydro-Quebec followed up and thanked our company for its work and its professionalism. And I use that on my website. I'm very proud of it. So it starts with identifying who we can work with on the territory and taking that first step, making those cold calls, knocking on that door, and persistence, going over and over and over again and not giving up. So I like to keep files on each individual company that I target and log everything on there as an aide memoir for myself. And it shows a history here of this is what relationship building is. And it's been one way. Nobody's been coming to ask about our company here unless they have a vested interest in a project that our community are working on.
Much.
I think one of the things that I've seen and I've participated with the other associations that I belong to is opportunities to network with corporations that would, have a potential interest in the type of service that I provide. I mean, and that's almost every company. It's widespread, but having those opportunities to go in, I think who does that? Kelly Lindsay. His organization, but they're geared towards students and having students being introduced to and networking with corporations for employment. I think we need the same similar opportunities as entrepreneurs, whether it's government networking, ice-breaking opportunities where you're going in and meeting and introducing yourselves, but in a focused setting. Whether that's, what other corporations, CCAB has a great network of corporations, but their networking opportunities are focused around galas. I don't know how much opportunity you really get to speak with people during those galas when they're all sitting at tables and enjoying a nice meal and entertainment. So, but for me, that would be really helpful, as opposed to me not jumping in the car, driving to someone's house or business and knocking on that one door. Certainly cold calls, but where there's more of a collaborative opportunity, I think is important.
So Tuesday, just for clarity, I was the project manager for Inclusion Works for the first 4 years of the series. And I think one of the winning formulas that they've used for Inclusion Works is that speed dating. So bringing together Indigenous graduates with companies that have progressive and retention policies. So it's a structured format, very well organized and successful. At the end of the day, they come away with hires, double-digit hires for all their individual companies. I think that could work for entrepreneurs, Indigenous entrepreneurs.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea.
Now, I haven't participated in any of them, but they have something, and I think it's called Aboriginal Business Match, which is exactly what you're talking about, which was kind of neat. So it's kind of like a speed dating for entrepreneurs to meet with corporations. So I think it's a good idea. I just haven't had a chance to do it. I think it was started out west somewhere, but that idea, if there was just for Indigenous, women entrepreneurs to do a kind of speed dating and sort of tell corporations and companies and organizations what we're all about, I think would be good. But I don't do a lot of work with mainstream corporations, so I'll let the other ladies speak more about personal experience on this question.
I think, what I'm hearing is really we have to be clear about our own expectations. And if it's just a nice meal, you'll get it. But if you're clear about what is it that you're looking for in terms of meeting people, then it starts to help you develop your conversation about when someone says, so what do you do? You're not the deer in the headlights, that you have a message that you want others to hear that's going to be captivating, intriguing, etc. So I think the whole, networking is one facet, but we also have to, I'm going to say, learn how to network in a way that's mutually beneficial. So it's not just the attending a dinner, it's about starting to build different relationships.
And again, we're back to relationships. Panelists, does anyone want to add and just close up here in this part of the question period?
well, I was going to say back to being clear about what you want, and using Tuesday's example about the dinner. Oftentimes, the word networking is pretty scary because you don't really know what the context is. And I see a lot of our women come to events and they stay with the people that they walked in the door with.
Okay.
And they're not sure how to enter into a conversation or to be open to be invited into a conversation. So that's a whole skill set again around the self-confidence piece.
Okay, I'd like to leave it with David to take us away on summary.
Victoria, I really liked your story about the 6-year journey. That must have been challenging. But of course, in the end, it turned out to be an opportunity. I have a question. This is is there anywhere where experiences like yours, Victoria, and the others, like a case study book anywhere? You say you keep a file of those you've approached and updated as the approach continues and so on. But is there anywhere where there are case studies? And that sort of takes me to a sub-question. I have no idea how to title it, but a Indigenous Women's Entrepreneur Association where you network among yourselves. You don't have to be high achievers yet, but you have a feeling that you want to take part in something like this. You don't only want to work for a mainstream corporation as an employee. You really have a passion to go out and do work on your own. I don't know such a thing exists. But back to the ecosystem and holistics, I know there are business schools, because I teach at one, that would benefit hugely, hugely, hugely. I guess back to one of your comments earlier that there are dozens of business schools and everybody teaches an entrepreneurship course, and very, very few, and in some cases, the one I'm talking about, none, go out and be entrepreneurs. They go out and work for some mainstream corporation, depending on what their marks are or who they know or who their father-in-law is or something like this. So I think there's an opportunity here to gather your feelings in sort of a case study book or an association as part of the holistic. So that it's a question and it's an impression.
I read about an interesting Indigenous supplier forum. It was on the procurement federal government website for the procurement collaboration business, and it talked about an initiative in BC that they invited Indigenous vendors, Indigenous entrepreneurs to a supplier forum so that the people in procurement who did the purchasing in Parts Canada could meet the Indigenous businesses. And I thought, that's not rocket science. What a great initiative. So about 2 years ago, I tried to bring that to Parts Canada here, specifically to Proteus down in New Brunswick. So again, calling, emailing, driving down, knocking on their door, meeting with them. And I volunteered my time. I said, I could help you gather the Indigenous entrepreneurs on this end, and we could have a supplier forum, just to increase the numbers. And I haven't had an update on that yet, but still at it.
Okay, as we travel on in our canoe.
Please.
Going to the next TP. Question 5, panelists. What supports exist now that do help Indigenous women access, quote unquote, anchor the customers and new markets? It's almost just, furthering our conversation that we were left at with number 4. Now we're talking the customers and into the marketplace.
you know, the Aboriginal business match, the Parks Canada BC. In fact, I guess that Parks Canada BC thing doesn't surprise me because the BC Forest Service is the oldest in Canada, and they have for years, because I was involved in 2 of the operations, encouraged, how will I say this politically correctly, non-Anglo-Saxon British Columbians to apply for work, for education, and to supply elements of their operations. So what other things exist now, or processes exist now that help?
Well, I'm curious to know the difference between what you're proposing and what NWAC has been trying to do over the last few years, because they have an Aboriginal Women's Business Entrepreneurship Network. I know sometimes they have an issue with, you know, not enough funding. They've had a few events, but I'm curious if any of you other ladies have heard of that or are part of it, and I'm actually not. So why is it that here we have 4 Indigenous women entrepreneurs and there's an Aboriginal Women's Business Entrepreneurship Network out there, but I don't think we're part of it? So maybe the issue is not so much that the network doesn't exist, but why we're not, or is there a better way to connect us as women entrepreneurs?
I'm familiar. I've heard of the ABIN, and my understanding of ABIN is promoting and inspiring new entrepreneurs, and that's kind of where they're from what I understand. That's where their focus is, not so much a network of bringing, whether you're female or male, but Indigenous entrepreneurs together and start. I've not seen those opportunities. I was actually one of the keynote speakers at one of their conferences to inspire and talk about entrepreneurship. So it's a little bit different, right, of the initiative that they have.
So again, to your question, I just heard of it last week. I was invited to speak at a women's event in River, New Brunswick, and they had a presenter there, and it was news to me, and I think it's great. Great initiative.
And I guess I would echo that. You know, I'm aware of it, but somehow I haven't taken that step to join, and I don't have an answer as to why. But you know, I guess whatever I know hasn't compelled me in that direction. And I think it may be the stage in development where they're targeting, you know, women who want to get into, as opposed to business owners. And that's just a perception I have.
To go back to the original question, I'd like to share the program out of Brunswick. It's administered by JEDI, the full name, the Joint Economic Development Initiative. They run a business boot camp, and from that cohort, they take participants through an incubator program and match them with mentors. That's how I became attached to the program as a mentor. And from that cohort, they move on to a business accelerator component, and they're closely aligned to the private sector. I participated in their events, and part of the success stories with their graduates, they participated in a pitch contest about 2 weeks ago in Ottawa, and one of them won first place. So proud. So we're starting to see initiatives like this emerge that are targeted and focused, not specific to Indigenous entrepreneurs, and starting out with industry partners to keep that focus on developing along a scale from business boot camp to incubating their ideas, the business plan to accelerating a startup.
Victoria, what does JEDI stand? Joint Economic Development Initiative, or
Yes, Jedi.
JEDI? Okay.
Tuesday, Jennifer, do you want to add in?
I don't think that, I guess I would just add, I don't think there are any specific supports for Indigenous women per se, but there are lots of places where you can get support as an entrepreneur from different places, or even as an Aboriginal entrepreneur. And Tuesday mentioned CCAB before. I agree, sometimes the fit may not be there for the networking that you need. And I think that, we're all working in different industries. So when you say, new markets, only you know your industry as well as anyone else. And like Tuesday said, sometimes it's helpful to get involved in your own area where there are other people, right? There are other people working in that area, whether or not they're Indigenous or whether or not they're women. They're where your markets are. And I think that just takes sort of research on your own part. I'm not sure the support is necessarily going to be across the board. Just because you're an Indigenous woman doesn't mean that you need support from other Indigenous women entrepreneurs, I guess is what I'm saying. There's other kinds of support out there in your particular markets and areas.
I think there's the Indigenous Professionals Association, the IPA, that I've actually just started to look into, because because it's part of the journey that I personally am on. I've been involved with two mainstream meeting associations. I've been on the board. I've been a president, and for me now, I've built those networks. I've built those partnerships with suppliers to help me build that part of my business. But now, for me, there is a desire and there is a need to network amongst Indigenous professionals, because I think our challenges are unique. Yes, we have a lot of similarities and challenges in being an entrepreneur, but there's other challenges as an Indigenous person and then an Indigenous woman that are unique, and that synergy, I think, with other people for inspiration and help, and just knowing that you're connecting with a like mind. And being able to grow off of with some of their learnings is important.
Yeah, I agree. That's APAC, Aboriginal Professional Association of Canada. Is that the one you mean?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
I think, just to add a point to that, what support exists, you're looking at them on this screen. So we need to support each other and lift each other up. So if it's through buying the products or referring to businesses of each other across this country, that's how we're going to support each other and holding each other up and promoting and talking about these success stories and these businesses that exist from coast to coast. I know that there's an Indigenous Women Leadership Summit being planned for Gatineau in November. It's being led out of British Columbia. I've been asked to provide advice and guidance on it too. So those are the types of supports that exist too, where we get together, get to meet each other, or reacquaint ourselves with each other. I know, Jen, our paths have crisscrossed over the years in our businesses.
Yeah.
Just watching your success, and certainly with Karen. So Tuesday, I'm anxious to learn more about your business and how can I promote that amongst my networks and grow each other. So it's getting together, it's lifting each other up, and you're looking at it.
I enjoy the vote of confidence and inspiration, ladies, as we forge ahead. And as we help our colleague David to summarize and bring us on to the next step. David?
This may have been the most difficult, but it also may have been the easiest so far for me, reflecting. There are organizations and processes in Canada available. Just leave it at available. But my question, is there a place, Jennifer, I see behind you a library, okay? Is there a place where you or I or any of us can go and find a list of those things? You know, we've heard of this, we've heard of that, we know about that. Such and such an organization does this. Each of our businesses caters to a different market. And therefore, what concerns me, I think, is sort of the fragmentation of our knowledge, and that there's no place where we could go and find the list, even if it was just as simple as the list, a statement of the organization, a statement of the organization's mandate, I don't know, a staff number or a budget. And my second feeling is that a lot of the programs are done sort of year by year or funding cycle by funding cycle. And for what we're talking about, the path of aspiring to, finding out how to, starting, gathering what is needed to become and becoming an entrepreneur, it doesn't work on a funding cycle. It takes time, and it takes energy, and it takes the time to build the relationships. So I come back to the place, I think it would be good to have a place where there's a list of all these organizations. I mean, I think I've heard 7 of them in our last 20 minutes.
Congrats, David. Okay, panelists, we're moving ahead in our canoe. I ask on question number 6, how important would it be for Indigenous women entrepreneurs to be provided additional opportunity to connect to Indigenous or not Indigenous, experienced business leaders who can provide advice at key pivotal points and help mold the core management competencies that are needed? So now we're looking at the heart as we move forward ahead now in our holistic towards the ecosystem of entrepreneurship. Tuesday, I hear that you want to talk. I'm lifting you up, sister.
I'm waiting for some of my inspirational speakers there.
Okay, Alberta.
Well, I think it's really important. I think those opportunities to because it inspires us. I mean, it gives us an opportunity to learn and an opportunity to. I mean, it's always hard to ask. At least I think it is. It's always hard to ask questions where we're not feeling our strengths. Those environments. I mean, I'm careful in those environments, but I think it's also really inspirational. If I had an opportunity to sit across from Victoria or Karen and Jennifer, we've known our paths has crossed over the years as well. But having an opportunity to sit down with them, they're Indigenous women who have very powerful businesses and their own experiences, and being able to just talk and share about your journey and where some of your growth opportunities, I won't say challenges, but your growth opportunities are, right? And getting those advices and looking at what you would call the giants in the business, because it's all attainable. If there's anything that I've learned running my own business and coming from where I come from, it's all a possibility. You just need to know what your dream is.
I think it's critical for us to have that type of support. And what if comes to mind role model? So, an awareness of just women entrepreneurs that are out there. Look, they did it. How do they do it? I wasn't born independently wealthy. I used my blood, sweat, and tears to build my businesses. And that lots of things can be done. So, seeing those role models, that sets it an opportunity that you need to address, resolve. Being able to have someone, if you could pick up the phone or send them a text, have you encountered this type of situation before? If yes, how did you handle it? It's much quicker to move forward that way than spending 6 days trying to do research and read everything you can by having somebody on speed dial say, listen, this is what I'm thinking. What do you think? Just bounce your ideas out, validate your solution, sounding board, and that type of support is critical to helping you build and sustain your business.
Karen, did you want to add?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just, I get excited when we have these conversations.
To see that you want to speak, and I'm saying, okay, the door's open for
and
inspiration.
to say, how do you build on this? How do you create these opportunities? I mean, this is a wonderful opportunity where I've met some new fabulous women that the conversation can continue. And how do we bring other women into this circle? And then to recognize that there are so many other men and women who are not yet in the Indigenous circle, but, you know, have stories to share that can assist us. And what are our opportunities to build those relationships so that, you know, we have mentors who are completely unlike us, but that can offer us a new perspective and insight. So I don't have an answer, but I'm going to, you know, I throw that question out there.
Go ahead.
So we have that list of all the associations that's not yet compiled, but, you know, David has started the bullet points that need to be filled in. But what about how do we connect with some of the other organizations, like Tuesday mentioned, I think right at the beginning, where you joined an association that's your industry, and how do we I'm going to say leverage those relationships? So no answer, just a bigger question.
And it's the affirmative, though, and that is what the question is. It's the holistic approach and building on what Victoria had to say in terms of that readiness and how she does do the door-to-door. And some of us don't do the door-to-door. We wait for those other bigger venues. But again, building that, strengthening our own inner core, our own inner journey to be able to reach out and to lift up and move forward ahead, whether we're on that path, the growth path, you know, with on that canoe, as I use the canoe analogy, but yet maintaining our teepees, maintaining our lodges, our homes, so that the fire keeps going as we forge ahead on this growth path and journey. And affirming, and that's the other part, is we collectively may step back because we don't know, but the best part is diving in as we learn and open up those doors to affirm this is where we're on the right pathway. So shall we journey on, or would you like to have, you know, more points?
I think somebody's asked us a question, because on the screen I see a little red number below. There's a little message. Maybe one of the viewers asked a question.
It's okay. So I just wanted to ensure that we're on question number 6.
Okay.
And so just if we're ready to go ahead, I just wanted to ensure that one of the, you know, other fine points that need to be talked in this segment.
I have one more point.
Thank you, Tuesday.
So, Victoria, I've been having a really hard time hearing Victoria's points. I get maybe every third word or anything, but Victoria, I thought even with that challenge, I'm finding listening to you inspirational, and I look for an opportunity where I can hear everything you're saying.
So we need to adapt the volume because I have a similar disconnect. Yeah. And here I'm closer to her here in Ontario. It must be that Quebec, Ontario, Ottawa thing happening here.
We're in an ice storm right now. It could be that.
Okay. Yeah.
Could be.
Yeah. Thank you for that. So are we forging ahead beyond with our core competencies? And I'll turn it to David to summarize question number 6 or takeaways we can have as we go ahead.
Well, I'm sure your individual and collective answer to this question is it's important. I mean, I can't get any other impression than that. I guess to go back to where, if at all, is the information that we would like to be able to get to held. And a little bit of an advertisement for this very project that we're involved on with our panels together and everything about moving into this Indigenous women's entrepreneurship situation, future, improvement. So what this question reflects is very much our feelings here about how we want to gather, meet, talk, get all the issues on the table so that the ecosystem in all its forms can be in place. Now, it won't happen all at once. It may not all happen ever. But the important thing is to make progress towards a situation where we're aware of all the things that can be supports. Of course, if on that journey we can add to them and improve them, let's do it.
Okay, miigwech, David. Now, panelists, as we go on to question number 7, what should the private sector, 3 main levels of government and Indigenous governments, do to promote substantively and sustainably to encourage the participation of more Indigenous women in business?
And if I may, before you all weigh in, this is a really sort of mouthfully English language question. And I apologize for that, but it would have been 2 more questions. So one of the main themes here, the words substantively, so that means with an effect, and sustainably, that it just doesn't carry on for one funding cycle of a government or a community or an organization. So sustainably, so that if you or any of your colleagues or someone just now aspiring to become an entrepreneur wants to engage in a real fashion, she will know that 3 years from now, 5 years from now, that support she's depending on will still be there. It won't have died at the end of a funding cycle. And many of the places I've lived and worked in the world, this has been one of the big problems. Some call it a flash in the pan. Incredible amount of progress, suddenly, fast, big, famously, sensationally. And then suddenly it's darkness again because it's ended. So I say this to explain why this mouthful question is there. But what can or should they do?
I have a short summary answer that when I was thinking about the question. So for the private sector, I think what they can do is get to know us. First, that we exist, that we have established businesses, and we're open for business. When I think of what can governments do, and we're talking about Canadian government or federal government, provincial government, I think government should get out of our way. Like, if I look at some of the programs that are well-intentioned and put in place, they create more challenges / opportunities that takes a lot of time and energy to overcome. And I'm just thinking about the procurement strategy. It's a glorified database that gives my information to telemarketers. So the information that's found on there, just client calls all day long to solicit different products. I don't see results from it. It's just an additional barrier. It sounds good on paper, not working. So for myself, it represents an opportunity cost. Am I going to spend time pursuing that, trying to make it work, while I could be doing something else? Is it the best use of my time? That's my short answer.
Okay, I'll jump in too, because I like to get out of the way. But also to stop doing what we've always done and to start to look at that ecosystem model that's holistic, so that the different levels of government and private sector are not operating in silos.
Okay.
And so that they're knit together in a way that you can just start where you're at today, as opposed to having to go back and start to navigate through all the different portals, shall we say, entry points of, requesting funding here or accessing this or that. That there is a way to do things differently, because otherwise, I foresee these continuous one-offs that take a lot of energy and resources to pursue something that may not have the return on our, whether it's investment, but a return on our energy that's put into it.
I think we need to rethink how we promote entrepreneurship to young Indigenous women. I don't know about you ladies, but I didn't grow up saying, I want to grow up to be an entrepreneur. It just was never really something that was an option. And I think about what the Inspire, used to be the National Aboriginal Achievement Foundation, does. They have these career fairs. And people can find out where they can go to school and sort of what sort of options there are. I think we need to really inspire sort of the next generation of young women to say, wow, yeah, I could be an entrepreneur, but what does that mean? What does that look like? I think there's a gap. Most of us, I don't know about you, but for me, I kind of fell into it because A, I didn't want to work for somebody else, and B, I felt I had some kind of knowledge that could become a business. But no one, it wasn't that, it was something that I grew up thinking it was something I could do. So I think there's a gap somewhere, and I'm not sure sort of whose role it is. And I agree with what Karen said. It is more of a sort of holistic thing, but that's something that I'd like to see to encourage more Indigenous women. It doesn't have to be young women, but I guess I'm just thinking young women as we are getting more and more educated, that this is a viable option for a career.
I think too we're making that huge societal leap, with the millennials and even, our own Indigenous millennials. They're looking for something that's more meaningful. And I think that meaningful is very much heart-based, their own dreams, and where can that be fulfilled? And I think entrepreneurship is the natural next step. But as you say, Jennifer, they need to see it as an option, and what does it look like? And I'm going to say in our own context, if you don't have those role models there.
And I think that's the key. I think that we all have responsibility in, including private sector and government, is sharing the story, sharing and profiling those women entrepreneurs that are out there now and what we're doing. But I think, there's a focus that needs to happen at community level. I'm with you, Jennifer. It certainly wasn't something that I was raised or thought about becoming an entrepreneur. I wanted to be a philanthropist, but I learned what that was as a young age. But as far as an entrepreneur, the word wasn't even in my mind. And when I talked to my parents, it wasn't in their minds because we were so focused on surviving.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that's we need to start sharing and inspiring youth with our stories, because we come from the same place, and we need to get out there and share, like, you know, I'm you. I share the same story, and you know, I've been able to overcome, and now I get to do this, or you know, and there's a lot of ways of doing that kind of promotion, I guess.
Any other thoughts, comments on how to intersect government and private sector?
Well, it's almost the who blinks first. I mean, they all talk about wanting to do it, and we are talking about it here in terms of how do you have that more holistic, collaborative approach? Who will take the first step? And it could be us.
And it is
But
us.
again,
Yes.
yeah, and to, you know, what's the forum
Yeah.
for everyone to do it? I mean, you know, the old whiff 'em, what's in it for me?
Yeah.
What's in it for government?
Yeah.
To make a big step forward and saying, instead of putting a program out there and calling for, you know, applications, etc., trying to get into the procurement of with the private sector, etc. How do you pull all those pieces together? Which is what we're trying to, I guess, define or at least describe in this ecosystem.
I'd also add that I think that all levels of government need to rethink their procurement strategies to really allow for small business owners, like entrepreneurs, because they say, you know, they're opening up opportunities for Aboriginal businesses to bid on all these projects, but they have so many hoops you have to go through that you got to have a staff of 10 people just to fill out their, you know, their RFPs or whatever. Like people who are just working on their own, there's no way they could do those kinds of things. And yet, you know, those are the kind of people who would do a fabulous job. It's just that the government still puts a lot of barriers in their procurement policies that really sort of keeps, especially individual women, Indigenous entrepreneurs from bidding on some of those things that come from government. Of course, there are some huge projects you need a team for, but I'm just thinking, when I started my business, I would have liked some of this work from government. And, you know, it's like, no, sorry, you got to fill this out. And yeah, it's only open to people who've, you know, been a project manager for 10 years on a similar project, and you have to list 3 projects in the last 3 years that you, like, it's just silliness, right? And that does that really prove that you're going to do a good job on a particular thing because you've got that kind of narrow sort of experience? So I think if they rethink their sort of procurement strategies, there could be more opportunities for Indigenous women entrepreneurs to get into that kind of work too.
And I also think to move beyond that rent-a-feather, you know, that Indigenous ownership, this is your business, but it's really us, and you're the figurehead.
The token, yeah.
So, you know, it's not the right way or the best way for Indigenous people to get into the procurement, even though it's bringing in resources to allow us to get there. So it's a double-edged sword, but it's also, let's do it differently. Let's figure out a different way to pool resources or support each other.
Yeah.
I was going to add as well, it's probably the most unpopular comment, but I'm going to
That's okay. It's welcomed.
Is I think they have to walk the path that they're preaching. You know, there's a lot of organizations, Indigenous organizations, private sector that's out there with, you know, hire Indigenous people, hire Indigenous women, hire, you know, there's a whole focus on Indigenous female entrepreneurships. But when you look at their practice, where are those Indigenous? because I know I'm walking that path towards that and knocking on doors and saying, hi, I'm an Indigenous female entrepreneur and I provide this service. Here's my accreditations. Here's my successes, and then I turn around and there's the opportunity isn't really there.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I think there's a real focus of having to be accountable.
Through someone else's definition of the word accountable.
Yeah.
And we have some idea what that accountability is when we talk about the Indian agent.
Yeah. And where do we get our own products and services for our own businesses? Are we supporting other Indigenous women, entrepreneurs and businesses? And sometimes it's that we don't know where they are, but, I don't want to use that as an excuse for not supporting other businesses. So the idea of knowing who's out there and who can supply any kind of service or product, I'm going to be the first one to try to, I would hire an Aboriginal women entrepreneur business over any other kind. And I think there's many out there who feel the same. It's just, do we know where they all are?
Shall we move ahead? So in hearing us on question number 7, David, I'd like to have you give us some takeaways and summarize this panel.
Okay. With sort of apologies, 3 personal stories. I've been a university rugby coach now for 13 years. When I started, all I had to do was show up and coach. No paperwork, no vetting, no nothing. This year, it took me about a day to fill in the 13-page form that allows me to ride on government buses, that waives my right if I'm injured on the rugby field. And some of the things on that pile of paper I have to lie about. I'd be very, very frank. Or they wouldn't take me. So it's nothing to do with what I know or what I can do. It's about this bureaucracy. So believe me, your comments on accountability and documentation and bureaucracy resonate with me 100%. We have a problem in this country, though. You all may not know that we are the only country in the OECD that does not have a national minister of education. Only country in the OECD. Other countries in the OECD can't believe this, but it's true. Canada is many Canadas because of our Constitution, leaving aside all the Indigenous issues. And I do not see provincial Canada becoming less provincial in the near term. So I am behind you 100% when you say you have got to do it, and you have got to do things differently, and you can do it. Because, thank God, we're still a democracy. So you have incredible opportunity. The barriers, the challenges are facts, some good and some bad, the silos, the bureaucracy, the interprovincial trade barriers, and all the other things. But you have many opportunities, and I'm behind you 100%.
Miigwech. Okay, now panelists, we're now forging ahead on question number 7. Is it reasonable to think that creating a national Indigenous women's circle that provides training, mentorship, capacity building, facilitation, and ecosystem support could play a major role in helping build fertile environments in the urban center and rural centers for Indigenous women who are looking to launch, nurture, and scale a business?
Short answer is yes.
Yeah, really.
I really like the terminology that's being used here as far as Indigenous Women's Circle, because a circle implies that we come in as equals and that we're have that people come in with their different experiences, but it's an opportunity to share your experience, but also learn and ask questions from people within your own environment. That's really different than an association. Because from my perspective, anyways, with an association, I'll join an association, and my expectation is to learn from them, an opportunity to learn from them, an opportunity to be introduced. And you get out of an association what you put in. I mean, I can put on my little president's hat for association and talk from that level, but as an Indigenous woman, entrepreneur, having, and someone who organizes events, a circle is it has a different connotation to it, and I personally really like that.
Yeah,
because it's more.
And I prefer circle over ecosystem. I'm not sure, that term doesn't really resonate with me, but I really love circle too.
Okay.
I actually had to go online and see what you meant by ecosystem.
Yeah.
You're not the only one who started that. but we're back to the wholeness. We're back to the circle.
Yeah.
More on this later.
Next round, we'll do that eco and circle.
I'd like to weigh in on this, and of course I agree that we have a significant need for this to create something really nurturing of incubating Indigenous businesses. But when I think of national, I just want to focus in that there's no one-size-fits-all type of solution.
Yeah.
I think of the different territories that we belong to, all of the different nations. I think of the East, our communities are spread out. We don't have the critical mass in terms of population. Yeah. So I think the economies are different across the provinces, across the regions. The language differences. We talk about the Indigenous communities in Quebec. Their second language is French instead of English. Cognizant of all these differences, that it's not a pan-Indigenous approach or solution, and just keeping that in mind.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
I guess I really like. I'll reflect on the language as well. That it's inviting. You know, when you talk about the circle, when you talk about prospering as opposed to success, and when you talk about supporting and encouraging and so on, it just changes the perspective and the framework. When I think of the word ecosystem, I think of the bigger ones that we've been talking about, the private sector, you know, access to funding, the role of governments, and so on. But within that ecosystem, if you will, we do have this circle of women who, you know, our shared knowledge, our shared experiences, perspectives, and so on, just strengthen and nurture us as we move forward. And it's maybe an opportunity for us to have these kinds of conversations more often, and with different women who are at different stages in building their businesses. So, you know, I think of, you probably can go online and find it, but it's about 20 years ago, maybe even less, they took a dozen wolves from Jasper National Park and they went down to Yellowstone, and within a short time, they changed the whole ecosystem and built it back into a very vibrant, environment in terms of bringing back animals and birds, insects. The rivers changed and so on, and it was just it looked like a small thing, but as time went by, the whole nature came back to the way it was supposed to be. So that's what I think of when I see the ecosystem. And for the circle of Indigenous women entrepreneurs, you know, we may be that group of wolves who are here to change a lot, everything, as it will. We're encouraging governments to change their approaches. We're inviting the private sector in to see a resource that they may not have really considered in a different way. Banks, financial institutions may have to rethink how they give out loans, because many Indigenous women do not fit the model. Again, back to the 13 pages, do you check every point off? And if so, you've achieved goodness according to the bank, or goodness according to getting on the bus, or whatever. So that's what I see happening.
So, Karen, instead of the wolves of Wall Street, we're the circle of wolves.
I got the tail end of it because you're fluttering in and out. Can you repeat that one more time?
Instead of being the wolves of Wall Street, we'd be a circle of wolves.
Yes.
Me bet. Jennifer, did
Someone
you want to
from
feed
a
it?
wolf clan. I like that.
Join the club. We're here. Jennifer, would you like to add in?
I think the only thing that I would add is that I agree that we need to change the conversation, like change the sort of, maybe the paradigm for how we see what entrepreneurship is. You know, in the same way that, 100 years ago, it was the women who used to always be the midwives and take care of the sort of the medicine, and then the men took it over and it became this medical doctor, I'm in charge kind of thing. The same way, I think we need to go back to our roots and remind people that, we were the original entrepreneurs in this country. We ran our families and our communities, and think, when the Europeans first came, fur trade wouldn't exist if it wasn't for the Indigenous women who, knew how to do everything and sort of take these white men around and figure out, how they were going to get these animals. But we know how to be entrepreneurial, and we know how to multitask. And I just think if we change the conversation, we can inspire more women that not only is this sort of attainable, but there's something inherent that enables Indigenous women to think in an entrepreneurial way that we need to encourage.
Well done. Any lasting comments? So I guess we turn it over to you, David, in this panel on how to forge ahead.
Well, you all know that my these days, in rugby, my main activity is trying to see better ahead. There are no experts on the future, but the more we can make each of ourselves a little bit more knowledgeable, a little bit more anticipatory of what might come, and that we take charge. And doing so, we go back to literally questions 1 and 2 about knowing ourselves. And I can think of nothing more important in this terribly stressed, chaotic world right now in preparing for ourselves, our families, our communities, our nations, moving ahead, is about knowing ourselves. And if I have one sort of, for today, concluding remark on what we've been discussing, it's that it's your job. It's Indigenous women's job to make the moves, to take the initiative for entrepreneurial aspirations to be more readily recognized. I have no other way of saying that any more strongly. And what I'm hoping is that the discussion we've had today and reflecting on it in the next week or so before the second panel is that whether the questions remain even close to the same is not as important as the fact that we'll come forward with more progress about how to do the things we've all agreed upon today. I again can't exaggerate how much I've enjoyed listening to this and learning, because words matter, and my words through the things that I've been involved in all my life are not the same as yours. In my life, I am not Indigenous ancestry. I'm apparently Welsh, and one of the more problematic parts of the United Kingdom, certainly personality-wise. So I have my own ghosts and goblins to get over as a Welshman. But I am an absolutely committed Canadian, an absolutely committed Canadian for all Canadians. All Canadians. Thank you.
Miigwech. Well, panel, this is the ending of our discussion. However, there are a number of questions from the audience. And for the next 15 minutes, I'd like to invite the panelists to comment on them.
I'll be happy to stay, but unfortunately I have to leave in 5 minutes. I thought we were done at 2, so I'm sorry. I've already got a meeting scheduled. I'm sorry.
Understood.
Well, thank you.
And I don't see the question.
I don't see the question.
We're just working here.
Oh.
We've had nobody comment or ask any questions on YouTube.
No? Okay.
So cut.
Yeah, let's...
Okay. Okay, so
We'll
Jennifer, your wishes
save
are
them for
going
next
to...
week.
Jennifer, you called the meeting to a close, so I'd like to say thank you very much. It's been an inspiring afternoon. To the panelists and to you viewers, all those who have registered as participants, you will be receiving in the next 24 hours access to today's panel discussions, along with the capacity to ask questions, comments, or make suggestions. We will also send you access to our survey as we ask for your help. The survey is only 6 questions. It doesn't require much of your time. If you share your thoughts with us, we will review your material that we receive, and some will likely be integrated in the next steps, either the next panel, to be held here at the same place and time, Tuesday, April 24th at 12:30. From me and the same station in our framework report, and that will be published mid-May. I say miigwech, bamapi guapmin, thank you, love you all. Miigwech.
Thanks. Nice to talk to you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.